January 10th, 1968. The convoy started at dawn. Before we left, this Army major gave us a big speech on how vital and urgent it was to get the convoy through safely to General Dearborn up at Long Cay.
Hello everyone, welcome to Sentinel. Today's topic is going to be toxic officer entitlement. Before we start, I just want to remind everybody to please like, subscribe, and share so we can continue to grow the channel. In the past several podcasts, we spoke about senior officer misconduct and whatnot. So that got me thinking is, how do these officers come about? Because for the most part, officers are pretty darn good. Yeah, sure, they're young lieutenants and captains, but if they're mentored properly by other senior officers and staff NCOs, they grow up to be pretty good officers by and large. But there's always a few in that group that sort of muddy the waters and create this chasm between the officer and enlisted. Now, how does that happen? Now, in my experience, I've served with some phenomenal officers, but I've also served with some shitheads, or commonly referred to as blue falcons. Now, how does that happen? Where do these guys come from? Now, their conventional thinking is, a lot of them come from the academies or schools like Citadel, VMI, and the ROTC programs like Texas A&M, because these guys are really wrapped tight, right? So when they get to positions of authority, they expect to be recognized and be entitled to certain privileges that the rest of us really don't even think about. Every officer has been taught to eat last, the troops eat first. Now that's just basic fundamental leadership responsibility. As we continue to grow as officers, there's these entitlements that nobody really talks about, but they sort of start creeping into the culture. And the first one I'll just bring up is PX parking. I never understood why there were special parking spots for 06s and general officers or flag officers or commanders. That made absolutely no sense to me. I mean, in my mind, the closest parking spot to the PX or the commissary ought to be for retirees, wounded veterans, or pregnant women, And I would always get a kick out of it, when you'd see this big woman walking out, some colonel or general's wife, and wearing somebody out for parking in that spot. I mean, give me a break, right? So what happens is this also continues on in our work environment, where you have parking spots for officers, staff officers, senior enlisted. That made no sense to me. So when I became a battalion commander, they took me out there and they showed me my parking spot. It says commanding officer, 1st Battalion, 6th Marines. And I'm kind of looking up and down this parking lane, and I'm seeing spots for everybody. So in my mind, I'm thinking, this makes absolutely no sense to me. It should be first come, first serve. You want a parking spot? Get to work early. And so I told them, I said, take them down. And they're like, pardon me, sir? I said, take them down. First come, first serve. But my point being is leadership is about servitude. It's not about entitlements, right? And it really starts at that level. And what happens is if you continue down that road, then you start seeing these commanders hatch, and I never understood it. So right outside my office, there's a fire escape, and, somebody put on the door, commanders hatch, commanders or sergeant majors hatch. Which, for you non-naval types, it means commander's door, and that's only the commander, the CO, and the sergeant major can use that door. I mean, you got to be shitting me. Why can't anybody else use that door? I mean, it made no sense to me. I had them get rid of that too, Again, the point being is that there are no special entitlements. As an officer, as a senior staff NCO, you're expected to be in a position of servitude. That's the type of leadership we want. And the Marines sort of gravitate towards that. But if we're always going to be entitled and we sit separate in the chow hall, officer, staff, and CO section, we distance ourselves from the Marines, right? And then you really don't know what's going on through their mind and their actions, and you sort of give this elitist, separate sort of image, which is uncalled for and unacceptable, in my opinion, in terms of leadership. Now, maybe you may disagree with me, and that's fine. Because what we're talking about is essentially these are all minor points, right? Parking spots and commander's hatch and whatnot. But some of the bigger ones that as you go along in your career, there's some big ones. So I'll give you an example. When we boarded ships, I was on the USS Wasp, and I had a a wonderful stateroom, which I never used the outer office area with the TV, couches, and all that stuff, and my own room, my own bathroom. And I went down the troop berthing areas, and these troops were stacked. Literally, there's about 2.5 foot, 3 foot gap between each rack, and they're stacked 4, 3, 4 high. And the bottom rack, literally, I mean, the guy who sleeps on the bottom has got a vent pipe that's forcing fresh air to his head so he can get some fresh air. I mean, it was unbelievable. It was shocking, quite frankly. So, so you get a lot of empathy for the troops. I mean, they're your Marines. They're your children, right? I mean, you have to have the same love for them. And I could never get my head around that stuff. Anyway, so then I went to, I was told I had to eat in the Commodore's mess. I'm like, okay, that's where I'm supposed to eat. I'll go there, because normally they have, the troop mess, then they've got the chief's mess, then they got the officer's mess, and now I've heard Commodore's mess. So I go to the Commodore's mess, and it was quite impressive when you walk in. Nice table with a linen tablecloth, and fine china and napkins and nice silverware, and it's all set up like a restaurant. So I was like, oh, this is pretty interesting. So I go sit down, and out comes one of my Marines, believe it or not, with the waiter's jacket on, and he's looking all proud and smiling at me because I'm his battalion commander. And I was absolutely disgusted. What I was thinking in my mind was, here's a young man that I trained for the last year to be an infantryman. And now he's going to serve me food dressed up like a waiter? I mean, you got to be shitting me. I never went back to that damn place. I hated it. And so I went to the officers' mess, ate there, or I'd go down the troop mess and I'd eat there. And once in a while, if a staff officer or chief invited me to their mess, I'd go eat there. But I just hated that whole atmosphere of this entitlement where everybody's sitting around all, full of hubris and having Marines serve you like servants. I mean, that's just pure horse shit, in my opinion. Another thing that that I never understood was this bosun's call. Now, you've all heard this long tweet, and I'll play it for you. So every time I would land on the ship in the helicopters, or I'd come aboard the ship, they would do this long bosun's call and then say 1-6 arriving. So one time it happened, I was flying in onto the boat, and we land, and on the 1MC, 1-6 arriving, and everybody on the flight deck is standing at attention, like leaning into the wind so they don't get blown off. And I kind of looked around, I'm like, you got to be shitting me. Man, this is a safety issue. Why does the entire freaking ship have to stop because I land on the flight deck? So I went to the ship because I was CEO of troops. So I went to the ship's XO and I said, this makes absolutely no sense to me. And he said, well, that's naval tradition. So it was also naval tradition to have people walk the plank. We don't do that nowadays. And I understand the naval tradition, and I'll certainly respect it. You're a sister service. But you don't need to do it for me. You want to do it for other officers? That's fine. I don't need that attention. Reason being is the more you do this, the more entitlements you'll expect out of the military, and that further distances you from the troops. And then the troops really think you're a jackass, right? So the idea is to be with the troops. They'll respect you for who you are, for your knowledge, for your leadership. That you lead by example, that you care about them. For your tactical acumen. This is what the troops gravitate to. They don't gravitate to because you're wearing a, lieutenant colonel's rank or a colonel's rank or a general's star. Yeah, they respect it, certainly, but there's more to it, right? And that's the part that's missing from a lot of these officers that end up getting in trouble. I'll give you another example. We're in Afghanistan and at the Kabul airport, and the airport was shutting down. Now, I don't know if you've flown into Kabul airport, there's mountains around it, right? So at nighttime, the airport shuts down, because just the approach is just too damn hard. And the commanding general up at Bagram, realized that we're stuck there, so he launches a Chinook helicopter to come pick us up. Now, Bagram's about 40 miles away. You can kind of see it way out in the distance. And so we see this kind of Chinook just barreling down at us, and it was right around sunset, the transition point, where the pilot can't see with his naked eye, and if he pulls the goggles down, there's too much ambient light. So it's kind of tough flying. So he comes down, picks us up, we load up, and we go land at Bagram. And I don't have a clue. We're safely landed, shit hot. So we get off the aircraft, and all of a sudden, my commander goes apeshit and starts screaming, "You tell that MF I'm an 06 and he should have landed at the VIP spot." And I just couldn't believe it. And legend has it, I said words to the effect, "Will you shut the F up?" And I walked off. And I was so disgusted because they all went to the VIP quarters that I just went off and found myself a hooch, which is, an A-frame tent-like structure, with a wooden floor. And empty cot, I laid down, I fell asleep. Next morning I wake up and I kind of look around as I'm waking up, and there's a bunch of Marines and soldiers hovering over me, looking at me, and they go, "Sir, are you Colonel Khan?" And I kind of look at my uniform. "Yeah, I'm Colonel Khan," And they're in awe that a lieutenant colonel is sleeping in their hooch. And, and I don't find a problem with it because in the field we all sleep together. What's the big deal? So I kind of say, "Hey, is there a head around here? And where can I get a cup of coffee?" A couple of them went running off to go find me a cup of coffee. I didn't ask them to. They just did it out of respect or whatever, And I went to the head and cleaned up, and I came back, and they wanted to hear about our battalion's experiences in combat because by then everybody had heard about the battalion, right? We're the lost battalion, and there's Genghis Khan. So, anyway, so I spent a few minutes with them, then I had to go off to meetings and all that. My point in all this is, as officers move up in rank, their expectations and entitlements get more and more and more, and pretty soon they just distance themselves from the troops. And then they become crappy generals. And it happens all the time. So it's really important that officers stay grounded with their troops. And one way of being grounded is, through the sergeant major. Instead of the sergeant major chaperoning around with his commander and, peacocking, I call it, he ought to be making sure that the commander is grounded and he's doing things that the troops are doing. Because one of the movies that probably encouraged me to join the military, it was called Boys in Company C, and 1978 time frame, and it's about 5 young men that go to Marine Corps boot camp. It's pretty hilarious. And then they're all sent off together to Vietnam and their experiences, trials, and tribulations in Vietnam. I'd strongly encourage you to watch it. It's Lee Emery. He plays a drill instructor in this movie, and you probably know him from Full Metal Jacket, which came out later on.
There are those recruits I see.
We're platoon 163.
The boys in Company C. The object of the exercise is to turn boys into men and men into Marines. Lots of luck.
But the piece in this movie that I want you to see right now is about them, going out escorting a convoy and getting ambushed and taking casualties and whatnot.
Son of a bitch! We're dying out here so that some shitbird general can have his fucking court stay! Happy birthday, General Dearborn. Here's your new mobile whorehouse. Compliments Charlie Company.
And that's what happens. And, unfortunately, in my experience in Afghanistan, it didn't really change because we built these massive fobs of comfort and palatial with all sorts of, dining facilities and all that. And that consumed us. So we started serving ourselves. You become a self-licking ice cream cone, You just start licking yourself, basically. I mean, that was kind of odd. And that consumes you because every general thinks that he rates something. You don't rate shit, in my opinion. You rate to lead young Marine soldiers and sailors. That's what you rate. And it's sort of servitude. As young lieutenants, we were all taught this. But as we move up in rank, we tend to forget this. And we isolate ourselves from our troop responsibilities and our leadership. And I think that's one of the reasons why we don't do well in combat, is because our senior officers are far removed from the action. And in some cases, they're sitting in another country. In most cases, they're several miles, tens of miles behind the front lines. In my case, when the senior commander was, over 100 miles away from me, and he's trying to direct me on a radio. He has no freaking clue what mountain we're trying to get around, or what mountain we're trying to climb, or what valley, or if there's vehicles in the ditch, and what other problems I got with my Afghan militia force, which is a bunch of thugs, about 200 of them. I had a couple of Afghan National Army platoons that hadn't gotten paid in 3 months, and their morale sucked. And they were basically another ethnic group that we brought down south, and everybody hated them. And then I had my Marines, and then I had the civilians to take care of. So I'm dealing with a lot of issues that he never really understood. And he would come up with like some stupid ass requirement. Oh, your Blue Froze tracker is not working. Well, great, it's just asinine stuff. Because so he could track me on a map where I am. Well, we're reporting our positions anyway. So nonetheless, my point being is that as we move up in rank, my best advice to junior officer is stay grounded to your troops. Have a mindset of servitude, and you'll do fantastic. You don't want to advance in rank because of entitlements. You want to advance in rank because of greater responsibility and accountability, so you can serve a larger formation. That's the reason you want to advance. And the other reason is you want to obviously lead Marines or soldiers in combat. That's what we train to. What happens when you create this toxic culture of entitlement, you see officers, senior officers, and even battalion commanders walking around with PSDs, personal security details or personal security detachments in combat. So, they got, in some cases, there's a dedicated platoon guarding a general officer or a squad guarding a battalion commander. That's unheard of. I don't understand that stuff. And the reason I don't understand it is, but what about that Lance Corporal? How come he doesn't have a security detail guarding him? So we forgot the purpose of warfighting and what the responsibilities for an officer are. An officer's responsibility is to lead from the front in combat under fire. It's not to sit in the back and be entitled or be protected by this cocoon of security. That's just horseshit, in my opinion. I've said before in a previous podcast that in World War II, on D-Day at Normandy, there were 2 general officers that landed with the assault waves. First one was General Roosevelt, who later on, died because of a heart attack, and the other one was General Cato. He's the one that when he landed on the beaches and saw everybody pinned down and yelled out, Rangers lead the way, and charged. And the troops followed him. I mean, that's the type of leadership we want. We don't want a leadership that's sitting back, in a different country and telling you on the radio, hey, get off the beaches and assault. That's horseshit. Nobody buys into that, and nor should they. And as these entitled officers move along the ranks and become general officers, then it just goes haywire, right? And, a couple of podcasts back, I talked about a commandant on the Marine Corps that was taking his wife to a combat zone. Now think about that as an entitlement. When you've got these young lance corporals and corporals standing there watching this and thinking about their wife back at Camp Lejeune or Camp Pendleton, and this guy gets to bring his wife to a combat zone. That makes no sense in their mind, right? And so what was the general thinking? And why didn't the sergeant major stand up and say, you know what, General, this is wrong? Because the Marines aren't bringing their wife, but the sergeant major kind of just played along, right? Develop these leadership skills by being with the Marines, by sweating with them, by enduring with them, by being cold and miserable, by being hungry, by sleeping on the floor. But if you're going to live a life of, in lap of luxury, you're not going to develop the skills, and then you're just going to be a shitty officer. That's the bottom line. And that's one of the underlying reasons why we failed in Iraq and we have failed in Afghanistan, is because this hubris. Hubris is always self-defeating. Because these privileged officers start believing in their own bullshit. And they think they're above reproach because of their pedigree, the college they attended, whoever their sugar daddy in that service is, the 3 or 4 star that's grooming them for future assignments or future command. The vast majority of the officers are fantastic. The problem is these the ones that are entitled, that are sort of groomed and brought along, and then all of a sudden they end up in this big command or important position, and it just creates a very toxic environment. Important that we get our head around this toxic entitlement environment that we've created in the military. It's not meant to be like that. It's meant to be where officers are admired for their leadership and their ability to lead by example. Not by having parking spots and eating in Commodore's mess and having special privileges because of their rank or their position. That's just plain horse shit in my opinion. So please share with us your experiences with senior officers and staff NCOs. By virtue of their rank and positions, they expect certain entitlements, and your thoughts on this subject. That's all I got. Stay rugged, stay united, Con out.